Hello, I'm Emily Hawthorne, a Middle East and North Africa analyst at Stratfor, a RANE company. This podcast is brought to you by Stratfor Worldview, RANE's premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analyses. Sign up for the free Stratfor newsletter at worldview.stratfor.com.
You're listening to the Stratfor Essesntial Geopolitics podcast from RANE. I'm Emily Donahue. Two leaders in sub-Saharan Africa have died in recent weeks. Chad's president Idris Deby and Tanzania president John Magufuli. Stratfor senior global analyst at RANE, Matthew Bay, is here to provide guidance. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Emily.
It's good to have you here. Let's talk about the impact of both of these leaders' deaths. First, Chad. President Deby was killed while visiting the front lines of the conflict of a rebel group. Can you tell me a little bit about the status of that conflict?
Yes. So the rebel group that had launched an offensive on Chad basically concurrent with the April 14th elections that Chad was holding, where President Deby was reelected before his death. They were able to make gains to about 150 miles or so from the capital of N'Djamena. Before they were met by the military, and the military was able to basically stop any kind of an advance towards the capital. That's when Deby went to visit the front lines and was killed, and we don't know exactly the circumstances around his death. But since then, the rebels have been saying that they are willing to restart the offensive on the capital. A couple of other rebel groups have also said that they will join the fight, or at least are expressing support for the current fight, although we haven't seen any evidence that they've been able to make more progress towards the capital. Now, one of the things that we'll be watching for moving forward is exactly how the transitional government that's been formed will operate. The transitional government isn't going through what you would call the normal constitutional process. The presidency should have gone to the Speaker of the Assembly. However, the Speaker of the Assembly basically said that this is a security crisis, therefore I'm okay with the idea of the formation of a transitional military council, which is actually being headed now by one of Deby's sons. He's the de facto president of the country now, although that has in recent days sparked protests against the government over concerns about not actually following through with the constitutional process and having calls for a more of a negotiated national dialogue, which is what the rebels have been calling for, which has up until now been rejected by the transitional government.
Matthew, so how are regional countries and foreign backers, I guess France we should be watching, how are they reacting?
So thus far, some of them have put out vague statements for the Chadian government to respect the democratic process. The United States, for example, has done that, as has various regional bodies like the African Union. France, on the other hand, has given its full level of support to the current transitional process. President Macron, in fact, visited Chad to attend Deby's funeral, where he basically said that if Chad was threatened by the rebels, France would step in to protect Chad. And French officials have since said basically that given the situation on the ground in the country, a transitional process like this is something that is needed for stability. So France is clearly backing the situation. Of course, as protests mount, it is very possible that we will see France at least look at ways to try to convince the transitional government to at least have some sort of a military civilian type power sharing arrangement, which is what we've seen in a similar country in Mali, where France also has the similar security interests, where it does want stability more than anything else. But right now, France is giving its full support to the transitional government.
Matthew, what are some of the implications for regional counterterrorism fights in this regard?
Right. So Chad has been one of the reasons why France is backing the Chadian government so much is that Chad has this history of being very active in the region through counterterrorism operations and coordination with France. For example, when Macron announced a continuation of the French intervention in the Sahel in February, when it was speculated that he might be announcing a drawdown he never did announce, of course, Chad said that they would actually surge and increase their commitments to the deployment by 1,200. Now, some of those troops have, according to local press or local social media accounts, have returned home to deal with the crisis in Chad itself. And if we see Chad being forced to redistribute some of its military personnel back to its own border to deal with its own domestic crisis, that means they're not engaged in, say, the counterterrorism operations in, say, Mali or Niger or Burkina Faso, which means that France and other countries that are involved there will have to be more active. And if France has to step in Chad itself, it also means that France's military attention will also have to be diverted to Chad, which then diverts their attention away from some of the jihadist groups in Mali and elsewhere.
Turning to Tanzania now, Matthew, the new president Hassan has been in office about a month. How is that going for her?
Well, so she's taking over from President John Magufuli, who was nicknamed the bulldozer for his very brandish style of being aggressive and protecting Tanzania's interest in a nationalist way that was disrupting relations with, say, the United States, the West more broadly, foreign investors, etc. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, she's taken some steps to try to distance herself from that kind of a strategy. She, for example, almost immediately ordered some of the ministries that are related to foreign investment, so like the energy ministry, to restart negotiations with some foreign investors in order to try to break down some of the barriers. She's also looked at ways to try to increase some of the freedom of the press. And she's also set up a coronavirus task force. Magufuli was famous for basically rejecting the existence of COVID-19 in Tanzania. Tanzania officially hasn't reported any new statistics around that since June of last year, and it's likely that they do have a very significant domestic crisis ongoing right now. And it's possible that even John Magufuli himself may have actually had coronavirus, and that could have actually been what caused his death. Of course, Tanzania officials aren't really commenting on that. But the point being is that she has taken a number of steps to try to distance herself, at least initially, from Magufuli in his kind of brandish style. Now, of course, she's a product of the system in Tanzania. It's essentially a state where the ruling CCM has almost complete control over the political environment. She's not really in a position to really change that balance of power, or really has no interest in doing that. But she does appear to have an interest in at least improving Tanzania's relationships internationally, and also more broadly looking at ways to actually combat COVID-19 domestically, as it is becoming a concern.
Well, given those situations, do we expect her to be successful in boosting the international relations as well as with investors?
It's going to be a very multi-step process. I mean, a lot of the damage has been done over the last 6 years, since Magufuli was first elected in 2015. But I do think she can make some progress. She has taken steps in the domestic government to marginalize some of Magufuli's supporters that were calling for more of a continuation of his hardline policies. But when it comes to, completely breaking down all of the changes that we've seen over the last 5 years, including, for example, the enactment of a lot of different kind of regulations around investment, a lot of regulations around free press, etc., there's a lot of work to be done. I think she might have an intent to distance herself from those kinds of policies, but I think when it comes to any implementation of those, the shift in the overall top leadership opinion on what needs to go on in Tanzania, the steps of getting there will take time.
Matthew Bay is Stratfor Senior Global Analyst at RANE. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
The Essential Geopolitics podcast is powered by Stratfor Worldview from RANE, the world's leading geopolitical intelligence platform. You can try Worldview for free and get geopolitical updates and analysis by signing up for our free newsletter today at worldview.stratfor.com. That's worldview.stratfor.com. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for listening.